Well then, let's begin tonight's conversation, everyone. So there is often this agitation from many Nigerians about the roles of the lawmakers on what they do and their significance to the livelihood of an average Nigerian. So the way it's what exactly is the benefit of this lawmaker's job to the average livelihood of a Nigerian. So the attention oftentimes is on the amount of money which goes into the National Assembly annually as their budget to running costs and all of that, or what the lawmakers take home compared to the living standards of an average Nigerian. So there is a report, Jega Africa Center for Legislative Engagement. The group is a think tank established to promote the development of the legislature in Africa. A committee led by a former chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has come up with a research which analyzed what the last National Assembly headed by Bukola Saraki in the Senate and Ado-Doguwa in the House of Representatives did, and what the 9th Assembly headed by Ahmed Lawan in the Senate and Femi Gbagadiamila as the Speaker of the House of Representatives should be doing. These are some of the assessment that they are looking at. And they said that, look, these are the number of bills introduced. 515 legislation were passed. 21 constitutional alteration bills, 5 of which received presidential assent. Senate passed a total of 172 bills. House of Representatives passed 343 bills. 53 declined presidential assent. Let's take let's take away a balance of what the Senate Assembly and the 8th Assembly, how they fared. In comparative analysis. So bills introduced in the 7th Assembly was 1,367. In that of the 8th Assembly, bills introduced was 2,166. Let's look at the bills passed in the 7th Assembly is 205 and the 8th Assembly 505. Well, it's all saying that based on what the 8th Assembly did, they performed better than the 7th Assembly, but they could have done better anyways. Those are some of the outcome of that report. Let's get talking. I have joining me the chairman or the head of the research team for this report, Professor Jega, a former INEC chairman. He joins us from Abuja studio, and the majority leader of the House of Representatives, Honorable Al-Hassan Ado-Doguwa. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on tonight. Let me begin with you, Professor Jega. It's good to see you publicly on television after a long time since you left office. I'm not sure how many times people have seen you on television like this. So let's get talking on this one. It's a bit different from what you did at INEC, but this time around we're talking about the National Assembly and their duties. What would you say is perhaps very significant from your research and the findings on the roles of the National Assembly, what they did and what they did not do?
Thank you very much, Seun. It's a pleasure to be on your program. And I have had the privilege of leading a team of researchers under the auspices of the Center for Legislative Advocacy, which is a center under Jega. We did this research over a 4-month period, and we came out with very significant findings on the basis of which we made a number of recommendations. As we all know, the National Assembly, the legislative arm of government in our country, because of the long history of military rule, is considered by scholars as the weakest link in the arm of governance in Nigeria. Of course, this is largely because whereas even under military rule, the executive and the judicial arms of government functioned, the legislative arm of government was not allowed to function, and the military ruled by decrees. So it is important, therefore, upon return to democratic rule, to pay attention to the extent to which the National Assembly or the legislative arm of government, both at the state and the federal levels, have faced their key responsibilities and how they have performed. So this research project tried to assess the performance of the 8th National Assembly, and it is the first of its kind in our history of legislation in this country. And the findings are quite significant. As you know, the National Assembly, or the legislative arm of government, has three core responsibilities under our Constitution. The first responsibility, of course, is lawmaking, in which bills are made and the bills are assented to by the president, and then they become acts of parliament or law. The other responsibility, of course, relates to oversight, in which legislators are expected to pay attention to how government agencies function in order to ensure that there is good governance and there is particularly close attention being paid by the executive in the execution of policies and even laws. And of course, the last, third, and the most, also a very important function of the National Assembly relates with representation. Lawmakers are elected on the basis of constituencies, and they are expected to represent their constituencies in the National Assembly. Obviously, how they relate with their constituencies and how they discharge that function of representation is also very, very important. So what this research did was to look at these three key components of the roles of the National Assembly, particularly the 8th National Assembly, to see to what extent they have met public expectations with regards to the discharge of these responsibilities. You have highlighted some of the findings in terms of lawmaking, for example, the number of bills and those that have been passed either by the House of Reps or the Senate. And it's quite impressive, to be honest, by the number of bills that have been introduced in the National Assembly. It is clear that a lot has been done. But it's also important to see not just the number of bills that have been introduced, but how many of these bills have actually been passed by the National Assembly, and also how many have been assented by the President. And clearly, the record of the 8th National Assembly compared with the previous assemblies, if I can call them that, is fairly impressive. However, even though the number, in terms of quantity, the number is impressive, what we call legislative performance is barely 30%. That is in terms of the number of bills that have been passed relative to the number of bills that have been introduced. So obviously, a lot needs to be done in that regard, but another significant factor, of course, has to do with the quality of the bills.
All right.
So it is significant
Professor Jega,
also
just
to
a moment. Apologies. Let me butt in for a moment. Let me come to you, Honorable. You've seen and you've heard from what Professor Jega said. In terms of the efficiency of what the 8th Assembly did, it's just about 23.8%, although the performance of the 8th Assembly is better than the 7th Assembly, but you have 53 bills that were not assented to by the President, declined by the President. Out of all the 2,166 bills introduced, 515 were passed. What do you think were probably the most significant cause for if you say failure on one side, or perhaps the success?
Yes, Sheun, let me start by thanking the Channels Television for really offering me the opportunity to be with you on this very important platform, Politics Today. I'm glad I have to share a lot of thought with my teacher, who of course was the one that almost signed my thesis and other things at the Bayero University, Kano. I appreciate that he's on board to discuss this critical aspect of our parliamentary development. But I think, like he has rightly stated in the prelude he gave in this program, that we have what you can call our traditional responsibilities. We mean the conventional responsibilities of every parliament world over, which basically legislation. Of course, we call legislators, and legislation should be one of the key role of every parliament everywhere as far as democracy is concerned. The second one being oversight function, and the other one being representatives. But if I should now give my own interpretation of what we do, just going by the question you asked, I would like to maybe reverse the arrangements of the responsibility as mentioned. One most important responsibility that every Nigerian should look at the National Assembly doing is that key role we call representations. And in fact, that is one major reason why we are even called the Federal House of Representatives. I take this as important because bearing in mind the nature of the cosmopolitan federation we run, the kind of federation we run, which is cosmopolitan in terms of ethnicities and diverse background, certainly this issue of representations where every ethnicity or every community in the land is being represented under one roof provides an important democratic parameter that we must be proud of. In essence, I want to say our mandate as being representative of our respective constituents under one roof provides that key responsibility of government of keeping the country on the same page. Especially when you have issues to do with the unity of the country at stake. Sometimes you have issues to do with federal character, issues to do even with the security situation we found ourselves. Obviously, this responsibility of the parliament to do with representing or representation of our people plays a major role in keeping the unity and the continuity of the territorial integrity of the federation you call Nigeria. And the other one, the lawmaking, which of course is like the EU members of the press are placing much priority on it. Of course, there is nothing bad when you look at us from that angle, and it doesn't go bad when you judge us by our performances in terms of how many laws or bills we have passed. And like you rightly said, and also just like the professor has said, it's like when we started, it's like a developing democracy. And we keep on watching the concept of the learning process. I would like to say without any fear of contradiction that Nigeria's democracy, as we started, especially from 1999 to date, even though my membership of the House of Representatives predated 1999, because I was in the floor of the House of Representatives as far back as 1992, that was during the SDP-NRC transition when Babangida was trying to transit to a civil rule in Nigeria. So, but I want to believe our performance from 1999 to date in terms of legislative responsibility is something very brilliant, and there's a lot to write home about. Especially if you look at it from the first, for instance, from the first assembly when Galinaba was the speaker, the next assembly when maybe His Excellency Aminu Bello Masari was the speaker. If you look at the way the National Assembly keeps on going, it's like we are graduating, and the kind of graduation we are doing is a progressive one.
All right.
Obviously, the first assembly is bound to maybe exercise.
There's a lot of lessons to be learned from what the assessment is being, the failures and the successes that are being highlighted. But the group also made recommendations for the 9th National Assembly, which you are a leader in. Let me allow Professor Jega in just about a few seconds to talk about what you think are the most significant lessons that this 9th Assembly should learn from or should take, some of the pitfalls of the 8th Assembly that they should not fall into.
Thank you very much, Sheun. Our report made about 17 specific recommendations which are classified into the 3 core functions of the National Assembly. That is the lawmaking, the oversight, and representation. I can mention just 1 or 2 relating to each of these. Relating to lawmaking, for example, as I mentioned earlier on, it is not just the number of bills passed, it is the quality of the bills. And we found out that there is need for the 9th National Assembly to learn from the lesson of the 8th National Assembly and introduce what we call pre-legislation scrutiny. It's very, very important to scrutinize the legislations, the bills that are presented in order to ensure that the quality is maintained, to ensure that there is no duplication of earlier efforts, and also to avoid a situation in which a law can be passed and the executive or the president will return it to say that there are errors and things like that.
All right, Professor.
So establishing...
Let me allow Honorable Ado-Doguwa, because he's a leader in that assembly, to quickly react to some of these recommendations. How do you give Nigerians hope of the quality of what you will be doing based on this recommendation, just in a few seconds before we close?
Fine. Like I've started saying, when you look at the way we operate as a parliament and as an institution, we try as much as possible to practice, to emulate exactly going in tandem with the best legislative practices. And whether you like it or not, the Nigerian National Assembly, which of course is the parliament now, is indeed the only component that reflects what you can call civil governance. Because even in a military government, for instance, you have the executive and you have also something in the euphoria of a judiciary still continuing, like Professor has rightly said. But what we do have as a problem in terms of our productivity, legislative productivity, Sheun, is the fact that we are still learning, and when we are learning, other institutions of government that are supposed to have a synergy with us, other civil society organizations, like the one the professor has rightly mentioned about, the one that met the speaker only yesterday. These are institutions that are very relevant to our own performance. And as a learning democracy, we must have to join hands with some of these institutions to work harder. And in terms of our productivity, certainly we need a lot to do, because even in terms of funding, which Nigerians make a lot of noise about, the funding of the Nigeria's National Assembly is by far very low when you compare it with some other other assemblies of its own standing in various countries of the world.
I know it's going to be
recruitment or employment of legislative aides who will help us work
in the front burner for a long time to come, based on what has been assessed and what are the way forward. But I must sincerely thank my panel tonight. Unfortunately, no much time to drive this conversation, but we'll leave it at what we have said today. Sincere thanks to Professor Jega. A pleasure to see you again, and Honorable Alhassan Ado-Doguwa, the majority leader in the House of Representatives. Thank you so much. One of the most experienced you'll find around. Thank you so much. And that's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Okimale. Bye-bye.